Hello! Today we're going to create a new session in the Neoserra Client Activity Tracking System. And there's actually 5 different session types that you can create in the Neoserra system. You can create a counseling session, a milestone session, a capital funding session, a government contract award session, or a survey response session. Let's take a look at each one of these separately. A counseling session, of course, would be used to track any time you communicate with your client. That communication can take place face-to-face, it can take place over the phone, or it can take place via email. In fact, we're going to show you how you can capture your email communications automatically in the Neoserra database using your default email application. A milestone record is used to track economic impact data. Anytime your client has any type of economic growth that you want to track in the database, you would go ahead and create a milestone session record. Capital funding records are used to track loans and other types of investment. So anytime your client obtains any type of capital funding, that would be recorded in the Neoserra database using a capital funding session record. Government contract awards won by either federal, state, local, or even international agencies can be recorded in the Neoserra database using the award record type. These are the 4 primary session types that we would be creating in the Neoserra database and that we'll be using or demonstrating during this video. The survey response record you could create in Neoserra, however, this is probably more seldom. Generally speaking, you're going to have your clients respond to your surveys using eCenter Direct. However, we realize that there are sometimes clients who either do not have access to a computer or are not comfortable responding to surveys online. So Neoserra does give you an option to create a manual survey response by you in the Neoserra database on behalf of your clients. We won't actually go into that particular session type during this video, but just keep that in mind that that is an option. Let's take a look at the 4 primary session types. Underneath the activity menu, we see that we've got counseling sessions, contract award sessions, milestone sessions, and capital funding sessions. And we'll tackle each of these independently. A counseling session, as I mentioned earlier, is used to track any time you communicate with a client. So to create a counseling session, normally speaking, you would start from that client record. You navigate to that client and then click New Counseling Session to open up the New Counseling Session interface. You can enter multiple clients if that would be appropriate. Similarly, you can enter multiple counselors to record co-counseling that might be taking place. The prep and travel time is recorded on a per counselor basis, but the contact time for both counselors is assumed to be the same. There's 4 different types of counseling activity that you might want to track. One of them is called the initial counseling session type. That would be the very first time you meet with a client, kind of as the name implies. The follow-up counseling session would be all subsequent counseling that you do with that client. But we also allow you to create some administrative counseling sessions to record administrative tasks that may be taking place by you on behalf of the client. And when the case is closed or when the client is no longer coming back, you can create a closeout session that kind of completes the cycle. Both the administrative sessions and the closeout sessions are automatically assumed to be non-reportable, meaning that you will not get credit for that time or that effort on any of the scorecards that are generated. The initial and follow-up sessions, of course, are reportable unless you uncheck them, and they're only reportable when you enter them on behalf of a client. Pre-client counseling is always non-reportable as well. You'll be asked to choose an area of counseling, and you'll be asked to choose a funding source. A funding source identifies who paid you to conduct a counseling session with the client. Generally speaking, SBDCs, WBCs, and VBOCs will enter SBA. The Procurement Technical Assistance Centers will generally speaking use DLA as their funding source. If you're unclear as to what your funding source is, please check with your system administrator and they should be able to advise you. As I mentioned before, certain types of sessions may be non-reportable, such as the administrative and closeout sessions. You should also be aware that all counseling activity conducted with pre-clients will always be non-reportable. Let's go ahead and take a look at this in a live environment. We've got a meeting this morning that took place at 9 a.m. that we'd like to go ahead and record with Betty's Dog Grooming Services. We're going to click on the call now to record the counseling that took place. The client has automatically been defaulted for me, as has my counselor. This is based upon who's logged in right now. I can record my prep time, my travel time, and everything is entered using minutes. So if you traveled for 50 minutes, that's how you would record it. If a second counselor did participate, then you can click on the little plus sign right here, choose a second counselor from the drop-down list, and enter in their prep time and their travel time as appropriate. For purposes of this demonstration, we'll go ahead and just leave it at a single counselor. Next, we'll type in our contact time, the date of the session. It automatically defaulted to follow-up, and it will automatically keep track of that. But remember, if this was an administrative session, you're going to want to change it to administrative, and that will automatically make the session be non-reportable. We're going to identify that this session took place over the phone, and the area of counseling in this case was business plan. So we discussed the business plan with Betty. And you will obviously enter in more detailed notes based upon your counseling session. I skipped over a couple of fields. You can use the additional area of assistance field to further define what you spoke about specifically. This drop-down is completely customizable database to database. So if you often talk to a client about a particular topic that is not represented on the drop-down, please again talk to your system administrator and they'll be able to update that. The subject line is intended to capture just a brief summary of the discussion. And as I mentioned before, the funding source should identify who funded or what program funded you to conduct this counseling session with the client. At the very bottom of the screen, we see the reportable checkbox. The reason it's kind of hidden at the very bottom is, generally speaking, it will default to the right setting. If you're creating an initial or follow-up session with a client, it will always be reportable. If you create an initial or follow-up session with a pre-client, then it will always be non-reportable. And of course, administrative and closeout sessions are always non-reportable. We can go ahead and save this session and get prompted for our follow-up. If we want to create another follow-up with this client, we can say, yes, indeed, we agree to talk to this client on May 11th at probably 2 o'clock. And follow up on business plan. And we now have a follow-up created that's automatically populated in our calendar. And if we go back to the client record, we'll see that that follow-up reminder stays on the client record. And if you've got your Neoserra calendar synchronized with your own Outlook calendar or your Google calendar or your iCal calendar, then that notification will automatically appear on your calendar there as well. For those of you that are not familiar with calendar synchronization, I'd recommend you take a look at your personal preferences, which is where the synchronization would be taking place. All right, we've gone ahead and manually entered in a counseling session. But what if we had emailed a client? There's really two ways of emailing from Neoserra and have that email message automatically be captured as a counseling session. One is to send the email using the Neoserra email interface. Let's go ahead and take a look and see what I mean. Underneath the More menu, there is an email option right there where you can use a Neoserra email capability to email the clients. Generally speaking, this particular option is not used for one-to-one emails, but rather used for bulk emails. For example, you might want to send an email to all your woman-owned businesses, letting them know that there is a woman-owned business workshop taking place next month. That's when the Neoserra email application is ideal. Generally speaking, for your one-to-one correspondence with a client, you're going to want to use your default mail application, and that would be something like Microsoft Outlook or Google Mail, or in my case, what we're going to be using is Mac Mail. So let's take a look and see what it would look like if I were to email Betty a message. I would simply click on the email address that's shown in the client record. This will open up my default email application. And in my case, like I said before, that is MacMail. And I'm going to say business plan follow-up. And I've got some email documented already. And in fact, what I've referenced in the email, you'll notice that I've said I've attached a preliminary marketing plan. Let's go ahead and attach that marketing plan to my email message. This will automatically attach it. I'd like to send this message to Betty and have it automatically be included in my Neoserra database. How would I do that? What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to go to my personal preferences and I'm going to take a look and see what my post box address is. A post box address is a unique address that has been assigned to every user in the Neoserra system that is tied to your counselor and center records. And this post box will ensure that this email will automatically appear in the Neoserra database. So let's go take a look and get this user, Kathy Aldrich's, personal preferences. At the very bottom, we see her postbox address. We're going to go ahead and copy that postbox address and include it in the email message that we're sending to Betty. So what I'm doing right now is I'm cutting and pasting that postbox address in the BCC field to send to Betty. All right. We've gone ahead and sent that message to Betty, and what we want to do now is we're going to wait for that message to be delivered into the Neoserra application. As soon as it's delivered, a notification will appear in the top bar of the Neoserra application to let us know that a new message was received. The message center should be reviewed every day to make sure that you clear those messages, because the messages that are going to be coming in need to be reviewed by you. Yes, they will automatically be populated into the Neoserra database, but that's not to say that we shouldn't review those messages and verify that the information in them is correct. Neoserra doesn't know how long it took you to create that email message, so there may be some time modifications that you need to do, or the type of session that took place, the area of assistance may need to be updated. So let's take a look at our Neoserra database. Right now, there is nothing yet in my message center, but as soon as I refresh my screen, we notice that there is a green bubble that has appeared right here. This is my message center. When I click on the green bubble, it tells me that a new counseling session was converted from an email with attachments. The subject was business plan follow-up, and the client was Betty's grooming. I can either view the message, I can edit the message, or I can simply clear it if it's perfect. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to edit it and make sure that I put in here all the time that I spent. It automatically defaulted to 30 minutes of contact time because that's what I have defaulted in my personal preferences. In this case, I don't want to have the 30 minutes of contact time, but I do want to indicate that there was an hour of prep time. The counseling area is business plan, so I'd like to make sure that that's identified. And here's all the details about the message. So when I save it, my email automatically got recorded, plus the attachment is identified in the right-hand margin right there that came with the message. Again, to review real quickly, you will need to review every message that comes into the message center because it can only utilize the defaults that you've employed underneath your personal preferences. We have a separate video that talks about the postbox feature that I'd strongly recommend that you take a look at. All right, next let's go ahead and record an economic impact milestone on behalf of our clients. So here's Betty's Grooming. She's the client that we're currently working with. And underneath the new menu, we could have entered in a counseling session. I went in through the counseling session based upon a calendar appointment, but I could have clicked New Counseling. And now what I want to do is click New Milestones. So it turns out that Betty's called me up and she said that instead of the 8 employees which she had earlier this year, she's happy to announce that she now has 11 full-time employees within her enterprise. I can record and say Betty increased staff. And again, your notes ought to be a little bit more detailed than mine, but we're just going to show you right here how to create an economic impact milestone. And when I click save, if this is an impact that also impacts her client records, it will automatically create a prompt to you to ask if you also want to update the record for Betty's Grooming from 8 employees to 11 employees. We're going to go ahead and say yes. Do we want to change our follow-up? No, we're content with the follow-up that we have. If we take a look at her record, we do indeed see now that 11 employees have been added to the system. So her record has been made up to date. Plus we see that the increased staff of +3 has been recorded as a milestone record. The graph icon right here represents the milestone records. Let's take a look real quickly at some of the other milestones that you could be tracking. You could be tracking certifications obtained, change in business sales, change in business profits, exports. Again, this list right here that you see on the screen can be completely customized by your system administrator. So if there are certain economic impact indicators that you'd like to track that you don't see, then this is something that your system administrator can modify for you. All right. If there had been multiple milestones that we needed to record, we could have recorded both milestones at the same time. Next, let's take a look at a capital funding record. Capital funding, again, is a record type that we're going to use anytime your client obtains either a loan, owner investment, venture capital, crowdsourcing, anything like that would be entered underneath the capital funding counseling or session type. We're going to record this again from the client record by clicking New Capital Funding, enter in the date of the application, the reporting date of the application, and we're going to choose the status. Initially, we might put in a capital funding session that's still in progress. When the client submits the loan package, we might want to record it in a database so that we don't forget about it, and it's still in progress. When the banking lender comes back and either approves, denies, the application, we will update that record with the appropriate indicator, or if the client decides to withdraw their loan package, that can also be recorded. So let's go ahead and record a loan that has in fact been approved. Underneath the new menu, we're going to choose Capital Funding. And again, we're still working with Betty's Grooming, so her client has been identified at the top of the screen to show us that this loan is on behalf of Betty's Grooming. The counselor is Kathy Aldrich, who again is the default counselor that we logged in at. The reporting date is the date when this loan will be included on your scorecards. The date of the application, which of course could actually be quite several weeks earlier. Perhaps they submitted the application on April 5th. We said that this loan was going to be approved, so I'm going to go ahead and approve it, and we're going to identify what was the date of approval. It was actually today. And the types of loan listed here, again, can be customized by you as appropriate. So we're going to say Bank of America was the lending, and it was, there is the loan. She had requested $20,000, and she's received $20,000. And we can say this was a loan for business expansion. And of course, my typing is not very accurate. Funding source, once and again, will identify who funded you, not who's the funding of this particular loan. So keep that very much in mind. The funding source will always pertain to you, who paid the grant for you to help this client with their loan. We're going to go ahead and save the records. And this now adds the loan to the client record. And you'll see that the data stream slowly but surely for this client is getting updated. We have a loan, which is the most recent entry we created, the milestone, the email counseling session that we created, the phone counseling session that we created, and then of course their prior sessions are also recorded. The summary in the right-hand column will always reflect everything that's taken place with the client. So we see that this client has been counseled 4 times, 1 initial session, 3 follow-up. We see total time, we see capital funding, we see everything there is to know about this client in a summary format, and we can even look at the data in a graphical format if that is appropriate. All right, Last but not least, if this client obtained a government contract award, then let's go ahead and record that award within, again, the client records. So from within the client record, we click New Award. We type in the date of the award, the reporting date, and for both capital funding and for award records, it's real important to keep an eye on the reporting date. Sometimes a client may not tell you about an award that they've won until 3 months after the fact. And if that happens to be right at the cusp of a new fiscal year for you, you don't want to put in a date of October 2015 when you're already working in the new fiscal year of 2016. So the reporting date is going to ensure that the award will be reported in the period that that date falls within. There's different types of contracts that you're going to record, either prime contracts, subcontracts, and you can also identify SBIR or STTR contracts that can be kept separately for reporting purposes, but for the 1806 calculations will be lumped underneath the prime contract awards. Of course, you're going to identify the agency type, the amount, and the source of information. Again, working with Betty's Grooming Company, let's click on the New Contract Award menu. And here we can type in our government contract award. The client has been identified for us. The counselor has been identified for us. The client tells us that they won an award back in February. They won the award on February 9th, but they don't tell us about the award until April 22nd. So we record the reporting date because this will ensure that you get credit for it within the report that includes the April timeframe. The contract type, was it a prime contract, an SBIR contract, STTR contract, or a sub? We'll identify it. It was Department of Education, and that is a other federal agency. And the amount was $30,000. It was a single contract award. We learned about it because the client notified us via email. Contract with and again, your details are going to be much more elaborate than mine are necessarily. It is, of course, reportable, and we can go ahead and save this record to save the contract award to the data stream. And again, we see the contract award automatically added to our data stream. So our data stream continues to grow, and again, in the right-hand margin, the award information is automatically added to our summary with this client. All right, at this point, we've covered the 4 primary session types that you might be creating within Neoserra. You could potentially create a survey response within Neoserra, but generally speaking, these are entered by your client directly using eCenter Direct. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for participating in this video, and for any additional questions, please refer to the Neoserra FAQ library. Thank you again, and have a wonderful afternoon.